Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here to talk just about a very small but influential slice of the poster movement in general, and that is the music posters made in the late 1960s advertising concerts in San Francisco. So the psychedelic poster movement, really the elements of it, hold on one sec. It was, first of all, it was a reaction to what was going on in the 1950s and early 1960s, a very conformist, straight-laced period, your classic military-industrial command and control environment, and this was a reaction toward that, against that. It was fueled by the baby boom generation. That was people born between 1946 and 1964. So they were coming of age in the mid-1960s. It lasted a really short time, only really three to 4 years. The posters advertised the live music dance concerts during the years that saw rock and roll grow from what was really a cottage industry to the big business that we saw after Woodstock. And the movement originated in and is generally associated with San Francisco and the Summer of Love, in particular, 1967. So we're going to be focusing on that. The rock concerts in the teenage scene, originally back in the mid-60s, were known as dance concerts, which were multimedia events featuring LSD-fueled music, light shows, costumes, dancing, and what have you. Nobody had heard of the bands at that time. The center was in Haight-Ashbury. And music worldwide was starting to reflect a more psychedelic influence and culture. So you had bands like the Yardbirds that were starting to get out there in the psychedelic plane. And then, of course, everything going on in San Francisco was totally locked in there. And the artists of the psychedelic period were really trying to reflect what was happening in the dance halls with their posters. I mean, this, in terms of the time frame, it was really short period of time before you had the Beatles in 1965, still with pretty modest haircuts and outfits, and it's only 2 years later that they're dressed in navy jackets and on the Magical Mystery Tour. So we're going to start in San Francisco with a convergence of a number of events that were happening, that were being put on by the Merry Pranksters, by a group called the Family Dog, and by Bill Graham's San Francisco Mime Troupe. They all came together in January 1966 with the Trips Festival, where 10,000 people attended. And among those 10,000 people who attended were Bill Graham and Chet Helms. And each of these gentlemen realized that there could be an opportunity to do these dance concerts, produce these concerts and these events on a regular basis. So Bill Graham was associated with the Fillmore and the Fillmore West, and later the Fillmore East here in New York. And then Chet Helms, his group as a promoter were called the Family Dog, and that was he was operating from 1966 to 1968. So to make the posters, they turned to a man named Wes Wilson, who was born in 1939, Sacramento. And Wes Wilson worked for Contract Printing, which was the printing company, and he had done the design for the Trips Festival and for several of the acid tests. And so he was well known to the promoters already. Now, before this, the posters that advertised music and concerts were what's called boxing style. So these are very straightforward, very legible posters that would tell you instantly how much they cost, where it was, all the information was delivered in a straightforward way. But teenagers and college students were increasingly using marijuana and LSD and taking the world in a psychedelic direction. And so this poster from March of 1966 from Wes Wilson reflects that direction, where we start to see the lettering bending, moving around. We see an appropriated image which doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Paul Butterfield. It's actually a guy named Bernard McFadden, who was a strange early Jack LaLanne type. But it looks to me like Neil Cassidy tripping his face off. And so I think that's what the intent was with the audience at that time. By April of 1966, Chet Helms and the Family Dog had been kicked out of the Fillmore. It's a little lesser known fact that Bill Graham and Chet Helms were sharing the Fillmore for the first couple of months. But essentially, Bill Graham went around his back, around Chet's back, and got an exclusive deal with Louis Sullivan, the owner. And so Chet was out, and he went into the Avalon Ballroom. And so you see here his first poster for the Avalon, and it's also the first of the psychedelic posters to use more than just black and white. So very soon, the lettering became pliant, began trying to again mimic the effects of the stoned audience that were watching the walls melt, the floors breathe, and the other sort of things that happen when you're taking LSD. So I am told. And so we see here in 1966, this is a terrific appropriation of image by Wes Wilson, kind of representing a band called the Grateful Dead. They had just moved up from LA. Nobody really knew who they were. And this is a Jose Posada skeleton, Day of the Dead type of image. First time a skeleton was associated with the Grateful Dead. And again, you see the lettering moving around and trying to fill the whole space, which is kind of what happens with LSD. Your entire space is filled. And so the posters were again mimicking that. Another way they mimicked the experience was with very bright colors that tended to clash. They were not really friends of Joseph Albers and his color theory. And so it made it a hardship on you. In July 1966, came this poster, which Wes Wilson considered to be really the first truly psychedelic poster. So here we see very difficult to read lettering, and the lettering actually fills the form. The form is the lettering, the image is the lettering, it's all one, and it also illustrates very nicely how one of the major characteristics of psychedelic lettering, which was indecipherable, instead of the straightforward boxing style poster, you have exactly the opposite in terms of challenging you to read the poster. And if you can read the poster, essentially it meant that you were in the tribe, you were allowed to come to the concert, because if you can't read it, then you can't go to it, right? So the major influence on the psychedelic poster artists was Art Nouveau, and it wasn't an accident. One of the things that was going on historically was that there was a rediscovery of Art Nouveau in the 1960s. It started with a 1959 Jugendstil exhibition at MoMA, and then we had Mucha was rediscovered in 1963 at the Grosvenor Gallery in London, at a traveling exhibition. MoMA, again, turn of the century Vienna in 1965, and a Beardsley exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum in 1966. And this also made its way out to San Francisco with the Jugendstil and Expressionism in German posters exhibition at the University of, at Berkeley's Art Museum. So that was going on as a background. And then in terms of the artistic elements of Art Nouveau that attracted these poster artists, first of all, the swirling, organic shapes and movement of Art Nouveau reflected the melting and pulsating and breathing character of the world when one is taking LSD. But then also, after decades of modernism and abstract expressionism, the psychedelic culture embraced ornament and the mystical, nature-driven elements of Art Nouveau's original rejection of industrialization. And actually, I'm working on a documentary on this period and on these artists and this art, and in talking to the artists, several of them specifically mentioned their hatred of abstract expressionism, and the fact that when they came out of art school that this was what you had to do, and they were rejecting that. Mucha's sensual nude imagery reflected and echoed the area's sexual revolution that was going on. And then finally, the ornate lettering and curving typography in Art Nouveau style became a template for that psychedelic melting typeface. So here we have the, on the left we have the cover of the exhibition catalog in 1965 that Wes Wilson went to and was influenced by. He was particularly taken by this poster in the middle, which is 1902 Vienna Secession, which is the Vienna version of Art Nouveau, and particularly the lettering that Alfred Roller, the artist, created here all the way on the right. And you'll see that Wes Wilson quickly began experimenting with that typeface, and this was August of 1966. And you can see here, this is sort of the classic psychedelic lettering. Often when one thinks of psychedelic lettering style, they think of this Wes Wilson typeface adapted from Alfred Roller. Also in this poster, you see this sort of wheat ear type of very Art Nouveau or Beardsley style ornament around the poster. This poster was done in Labor Day, 1966, and you see a woman turning. Her hair is framing the entire lettering. This is the first time that Wes Wilson would use a nude in his posters, and it would definitely not be his last. In October 1966, he produced what's one of the most iconic posters from the psychedelic poster movement, and it's called The Sound. And this was October 1966. He was advertising 2 weeks of shows, so he decided to sort of give it a title. And the sound was what was driving the whole experience. The sound was at the beat of it all. And that San Francisco sound, very distinctive Farsi fa organ and searing electric guitar. In any case, you have a nude here who is strong, Art Nouveau style, strong woman, confident in herself, dancing blissfully, and essentially inviting you, the viewer, to join in the experience. Now, speaking of the experience, this poster is another one of Wes Wilson's masterpieces from February of '67. And essentially, these posters, Wilson embraced the words of Marshall McLuhan, whose book was very popular at that time, and that is that the medium is the message. And so, in this case, what these posters were doing was, they were not trying to communicate legibly and quickly and easily. They were communicating an experience. If you went to this event, you were going to get more than just Otis Rush and the Grateful Dead. You were going to get this whole psychedelic experience, and that's really what was being advertised here. There's another example here from March 1967, and again, the appropriation of images is, that may have absolutely nothing to do with what's being advertised. It was one of the hallmarks of the psychedelic style. Here we have totem pole from the Pacific Northwest motif, and again, that exquisite psychedelic lettering. This is perhaps Wilson's Sistine Chapel moment. He considers his finest poster ever. April 1967. It's advertising the birds, and you have this incredible chiastic cross between the lettering and integration with the image. And of course, the image is peacocks. Did I say Art Nouveau? So now, there was a problem that was going on for the artists, and that was that they were hired on a work-for-hire basis. So they didn't own the copyrights to the work after it was printed. Originally, these were just supposed to be used for advertising the concert, and they were disposable. They weren't supposed to last, have a value past the date of the concert. But of course, they became collectible right away. I literally, in years of working on this documentary, I cannot find a photograph that has a psychedelic poster on a telephone pole. Everybody that was there will tell you that they were on poles everywhere, but you cannot find them, and that's because they were torn off the walls. They were too beautiful. So Wes Wilson was really battling with Bill Graham, the promoter, about royalties or about some sort of revenue sharing deal or being paid more up front for the poster, because the promoters were overprinting the posters and reprinting the posters and selling them as works of art, selling them as posters to teenagers, and that wasn't in the original deal. So he really came to heads with Bill Graham, thought he had a deal, but it collapsed, and so he created this poster in May of 1967, which I call Wes Wilson's Last Stand. Oh, sorry about this. So this poster, it features a kind of an angry caricature of Bill Graham over here, a woman who's got her hand on her belly asking, basically asking for more, and here's a cobra snake with a $$ sign in the $sign in its mouth, and even a little stylized swastika up there. Bill Graham was essentially smuggled out of the Holocaust, so essentially a Holocaust type of survivor, very sensitive to that, and needless to say, after this, Wes Wilson was fired. So that took us to May 1967. Now, in the spring of 1966, when this form was created, this psychedelic poster form was created, and Wes Wilson is considered the father of the psychedelic poster. All the posters were done by Wes Wilson. It wasn't until mid-June that Mouse and Kelly were called on to start doing the posters. So, and we're going to go there and talk about them now. Well, in a moment. Okay, so I want to review and presage some of the characteristics of the psychedelic poster movement. So we have indecipherable lettering, image appropriation, sometimes an inside joke. So those lowly rolling papers may be making a reappearance here shortly. Wild juxtaposition of color. And the artists competed for work, but they also collaborated, which was very unusual. As Stanley Mouse said when he moved to England, they couldn't believe that the artists would actually collaborate. The bands had nothing to do with how they were advertised, so none of the bands had any input. And they another funny thing about these posters is none of them had the year on them, because they were instantaneous. You knew what it was. It was like coming up in 2 weeks. And finally, there were crushing deadlines. So these posters had to be produced, they were, within a week. And so, as Moscoso said, sometimes the best work isn't labored over. But that's why the name of this presentation is in a furious moment, because it's not just that the era was very short, but also the deadlines really, forced the issue on these guys, week after week after week. So Mouse, who had recently moved from Detroit, and Alton Kelly, who was from Maine, but who had been part of that Family Dog group previously already, they formed a graphic design team. And Kelly would do the art direction, and Mouse would do the lettering. Mouse was a man with a hand. He was seething with talent, having done over 10,000 silkscreen T-shirts in Detroit, starting in 1959. He was 26 when he got to San Francisco in 1966. So he was an accomplished airbrusher. And this was the era with the hot rod art and weirdo art, as Mouse put it. So their second poster that they did was a big hit, and this was, it's not a poster for Zigzag rolling papers, it's actually a poster for Big Brother and the Holding Company and Quicksilver Messenger Service. But it mimicked the Zigzag poster, and then in lettering at the bottom they said, "What you don't know about copying and duplicating won't hurt you." But this was, of course, a knowing wink to the stoned audience. It's like they knew what it was. This wasn't smoking. This wasn't cigarettes they were advertising or referring to. It was pot. So, and Zigzag, they were very worried that they actually left town because they thought they were going to get busted first by the police and then by Zigzag. But Zigzag loved it because they got $1 million ad campaign to hippies because they couldn't advertise to hippies because marijuana was extremely taboo. Now, LSD wasn't even illegal then. It wasn't illegal till October 1966. But pot, reefer madness, was very much chased down enthusiastically by the police. So this poster was August 1966, and it was the first poster that used a split fountain technique. So they split where the inks went into the canister, and every poster came out slightly differently. So, and this is again, you have Kelly coming up with an image, and then Mouse doing the lettering. So this is August 1966, and so they used, Mouse and Kelly chose this Frankenstein monster. At this time, the Grateful Dead were sort of surfing around looking for some sort of icon that they could use for just general advertising, I guess. And so the poster artists were quietly auditioning to try to get their image be the winning one. And so we saw this Jose Posada skeleton that Wes Wilson had proposed in June. This was August, and Jerry Garcia loved Frankenstein, so this is a good prospect. In any case, you can see it, if you look closely at it, you'll notice that the Frankenstein monster's eyes are almost completely shut. He's obviously toasted, and evidently so were the artists because they spelled the name Grateful Dead wrong. Fortunately for Mouse and Kelly, they got another shot at it. And they got a lot of their inspiration from the library, the San Francisco General Library, which that's what they called the internet back then. And so they were at the library and they found this book, the Rubaiyat by Omar Khayyam, 14th century Persian poems. And they found this image and they said, wow, this is perfect for the Grateful Dead. We've got to take it. And since they couldn't take it out of the library because it was in the rare books room, Kelly took out his penknife that he then lent to Angelina and took his penknife out and took the image out and brought it home, and that's how we got the famous Skeleton and Roses poster from September of 1966. So just some other examples here of Mouse and Kelly's work. Heavy, I don't know, it's just a name for, it's not a band, here's the bands. But heavy is, of course, meant profound back in the hippie days. And so here's this image here. Very nice Art Nouveau lettering by Mouse. Here we have a poster with Pooh and Piglet. And again, that little wink inside, because if you look closely, you'll see that Pooh has got a kilo under his arm here. And Piglet's got a little trail of smoke up there. He's smoking a joint. So. Now, I don't have the AI version here, but I actually put this poster into one of those, in a free AI engine, and described what I wanted for like a minute to just say, make them walk off to the sunset. Unbelievable. It's crazy stuff. Anyway, so, so when Mouse discovered Mucha, he basically said, I felt I was channeling him. He felt I was Mucha at that time. And so you can see the influence, again, of Art Nouveau directly from Mouse and Kelly as this quotation of the Job rolling paper poster that we just saw. They've hyped up her colors. She's purple and green, and evidently the contents of her cigarette is no longer tobacco. So, just as an aside, these posters were all machine lithographs. That none of them used Day-Glo ink, no neon ink. It was just standard CMKY, and a lot of technique. But anyway, so these are the tin plates here showing the poster in production. And again, another Art Nouveau inspired poster by Mouse and Kelly. This one, that's La Samartine by Mucha, and here's the Mouse's quotation of it. And so that's Mouse and Kelly. Now, the San Francisco poster artists, the most prominent one are prominent ones are known as the Big Five. So we've got Wes Wilson, we had Mouse and Kelly, and now we have the fourth one, Victor Moscoso. So Moscoso was born in Spain in 1936, moved to Brooklyn, went to Cooper Union, studied at Yale under Joseph Albers, and he moved to San Francisco in 1959, became an instructor at San Francisco Art Institute, and he said, he started seeing the posters on the wall. He said, man, I've got to get into this somehow. So his first poster was really pretty lame. This is it from June of 1966. And he basically said, I don't know what I'm doing here. I was taught to make lettering legible. I was taught not to use clashing colors. I was taught to make images relevant. And so he just waited, and he said he watched for 5 months as Mouse and Kelly and Wilson kept coming out with posters, bing, bing, bing. It kept getting better and better. He said, I've got to get involved here. So finally, in December of 1966, he did his first truly psychedelic poster. So to quote Victor, he said, that was it. Boom, the doors opened up, and I walked out onto Ebbets Field as one of the players. Finally, I got on the train. Now, all I had to do was to catch up with the others. So, well, catch up he would. This is another poster from December 1966, Hippie Santa, and you can see the green and the red are starting to clash there, create a vibrating effect with the eye. And then in January, so Moscoso was more of a professional artist, I'd say, than the others, and he realized that the promoters were keeping the copyright. So he went to a small club called the Matrix, and he said, I'll do the posters for you for free if you let me keep the copyright. I'll do 200 posters, you get 200, and I'm gonna take 1,500, 1,000, whatever I print, and I get to sell those. So they said, awesome. Are you kidding? Free advertising by Victor Moscoso? We'll take it. So he developed this series of posters called Neon Rose, and here is where he really drove his color theory over the edge, the Joseph Albers edge, to pack it with maximum power and punch. And these posters positively vibrate, especially if you're in the right state of mind. And here you've got the field of orange and this incredible depth of lettering. And I mean, this work is very, very obscure, difficult to understand. This features a 1930 surrealist photo by Roel Ubeck, and he's solarized it, and then psychedelic coloring and the lettering. And Moscoso experimented with all different types of lettering. He was incredibly talented. Probably the poster that he's best known for is not something that he would have named. He made this poster in 1967 called The Chambers Brothers, with the lettering cleverly encased in sunglasses of the woman's face, and it was reprised in 2000 for the Cameron Crowe movie Almost Famous. And so Moscoso didn't get any royalties or any consideration for this, but this poster is perhaps his best known. He's incredibly versatile. Here you see a pair of posters that are just surreal collages. I mean, where'd that come out of? This poster, now every great artist has to have like a flower, you have to do a pot of flowers, right? You gotta do still life, you gotta do a pot of flowers. So here we have Moscoso's try. All the lettering is very cleverly disguised in among the flowers, and something else is disguised there as well. If you take a look at the vase and turn it upside down, you'll see that it's a woman's face. You can see the woman's face, right? All right. And finally, another Moscoso here. Again, the Art Nouveau theory, the peacock. The Quicksilver Messenger Service is up there. You've got lettering in here, you've got lettering there, you've got lettering, it says Peacock Ball across the bottom. I mean, it was very elaborate work. And another classic by Moscoso, where you've got this woman dancing joyously, uninhibited, behind what is, I don't know, is this James Bond or is this a blinds, Venetian blinds? Very difficult lettering. And speaking of lettering, I was wondering if anybody could tell me, now if you know the answer, then you can't say it, but if you don't know the answer, you're just looking at this for the first time. Can anyone tell me, can anyone read this? Well, here's the trick. This is called reverse space lettering. And so you've got these red objects are not the letters. They're the space between the letters. So if you look here, you see a T, an R, a P, and an S, TRIPS, which is stands for the Rock Poster Society. But in any case, this is an example of the type of lettering that the poster artist, Victor Moscoso in particular, but all the poster artists use from time to time, which is just extremely difficult to understand. Moscoso also pioneered the posters that were animated if you showed different colored lights on them. And so you'll see here that the poster begins to fly. And you can also see the reverse space lettering here. See when it's in red? I can't read that. In black, I can read. It says Steve Miller Band. So there we have a flying poster. Now, the first time that happened, he was told this by a friend. He said, you know, I had the poster in my apartment, and the lights were going on and off, and I could see that the wings were moving. She's flying. And it was said that this was the last time that Victor Moscoso did this by accident. So there we have Victor Moscoso. And the fifth member of the Big Five is Rick Griffin. So he was born in Southern California in 1944, and he was a surfer who was also deeply influenced by exposure to Native American, Egyptian, and other classic ancient cultures that would be later reflected in his psychedelic posters. At first, Griffin had a very sort of sketchy, illustrative style, and very much focused on this family dog attempt to recapture the essence of the West. So the West had been appropriated by the John Wayne, the image of John Wayne, cowboys and Indians, that sort of thing. And so the hippies, in particular Chet Helms, were trying to redefine the West, this sort of a psychedelic cowboy type of Wild West. So the lettering here is very difficult to read, but it looks like it's on a poster for, you know, the railroad coming to town, or, you know, a wanted poster, or some sort of saloon poster for San Francisco. And we have specifically Gold Rush, gold, i.e., like, you know, Colombian gold, Sutter's Mill, again, Western San Francisco imagery. He's actually, if you notice, the miner's got a couple of gold bricks here. They're not gold bars. They are tied up with string. So, and here again, this was Rick Griffin in the first half of 1967, and he also did the logo for Rolling Stone magazine, which came out in November of '67. But by the second half of 1967, something, I don't know what it was, I guess I could say that it was probably LSD. Rick Griffin went off into a much further dimension of space. And so what we see here are these posters that are filled with lavish hippie symbols. The heart meant something, the torch meant something, and very elaborate Trump Deloy lettering that's very difficult to read and very, very ornate, which would actually, in some ways, presage graffiti. And so this poster, for example, can anyone read this one? Keep going. Well, no, you can't. No, don't read this part. No, I mean this part. That's cheating, Daniel. Okay, can anyone read this? No, you can't, because it's not lettering. It's shapes that look like lettering. And so, I mean, really, this could be on the side of a subway car, right? Oops. So here's an example. This is actually a collaboration between Moscoso and Rick Griffin, but you've got Griffin's elaborate lettering, some kind of trash burner here, a scarab, yin-yang things with legs running around. This poster from January of 1968, incredibly elaborate. This a very sort of Art Nouveau, thick, almost veins of color and swirling style. Very difficult lettering. This is Quicksilver, Kaleidoscope, and then this is a reverse letter. Again, that reverse lettering style. Very difficult to read. And then in February of 1968, Griffin came out with his opus, which is known as the Flying Eyeball. And so this ferocious image of an eye coming through a portal. I mean, Rick Griffin had almost lost his eye when he was a teenager or late teenager, and so it had symbolic meaning to him. And you've got a skull and a serpent, flames, all this sort of stuff. And generally, it's considered to be the eye of God peering through at man. And Griffin was wrestling with a lot of very carnal, realistic, themes of sex and death and things like that. This is Oxymoxa in January of 1969. This poster for the Grateful Dead floored them. They asked him if he could repurpose it for their third album cover, which is where it gets its name, Oxymoxa. But if you were to look at this closely, you would see that this is a sun, but the rays of the sun are actually little sperm. And there are all sorts of fertile symbols here. and this is even very carnal. I'll just leave that to your imagination, but it's worth looking at closely. But Rick Griffin was, incredibly elaborate illustrator. So those are the San Francisco Big Five. It's important to know that 93% of the posters for the Fillmore and the Avalon up until June of 1967 had been done by these five artists. So why are they the Big Five? They had there was a show, an art show at a fine upscale gallery downtown in San Francisco, recognizing these poster artists and the poster art. So that finally society realized that something was going on. And this was called the Joint Show. So, but of course they weren't the only artists of import, and that often people refer to that should be the Big Six, and Bonnie McLean would be the sixth one. So Bonnie was married to Bill Graham, and she was doing psychedelic chalkboard announcements at the Fillmore while Wes Wilson was doing the posters. And when Wes Wilson was fired, she was immediately brought in to start doing the posters. And she had taken a lot of art classes at Pratt. She was very talented. So she didn't think of herself as an artist at that time, but she was clearly talented, and especially talented at drawing the human face. So you'll see in her style, so she did about 30 posters for Bill Graham in 1967 and a few in 68. A lot of Celtic and Gothic ornamentation to her style that she brought into the psychedelic style. Probably her, certainly her best known piece, and again, another iconic, top 10 iconic psychedelic period posters is this one for the Yardbirds and the Doors. You see this beautiful face, a passive expression, and what's interesting is that Bonnie McLean really featured the female gaze. It wasn't the same as an undulating, naked Wes Wilson babe. It was a more gentle and knowing look to it, and she just really had a talent for faces. But she also had, classic appropriation of the psychedelic style. Interesting. She's got her Celtic signs in here. Beautiful Fillmore across the belt. On this particular poster. and this one from the end of '67 called the 6 Days of Sound. Now, it's interesting, in my research, I realized that in all of these posters, none of the people are smiling. It's weird. And so, you just go back, no one's smiling. So, I mean, my theory is that the part of the whole hippie utopian dream was a search for authenticity, and that smiling is selling. So, but I don't know. Anyway, next we have Lee Conklin, and Conklin did about 30 posters also for the Fillmore. He was from Pennsylvania, and his background was cartooning. So he was an incredibly dense illustrator who would often hide things inside other things. This poster, I can't imagine what it'd be like if you were the printer and he walked in and said this is what he wanted to do on this poster. But Conklin, so his style again was very dense and full of things that were inside other things, or maybe turning into other things. A lot like the Italian Giuseppe Arcimboldo from the 16th century, who did all these portraits with people made up of fruits and vegetables and harvests and things like that. So, I mean, compare this to, this Yardbirds poster here, which is almost Hieronymus Bosch in terms of its ferocity of image. And this one here for the Jeff Beck group. So a Lee Conklin poster you have to look at a lot more closely. So here we look at the lettering up close, and we see that this is some sort of horse. It's like a bug. Every one of these parts of lettering is some sort of wild, imaginative burst from Conklin. Conklin's most famous poster is known as the Santana Lion, because Santana liked it so much they asked if they could repurpose it for their first album cover, which you see there. And it's interesting because this poster, first of all, it had come from a drawing in Conklin's portfolio. So it looked like this at first. And to do the lettering, he actually used whiteout. So all the lettering was designed using whiteout. And it's also kind of ironic to think of the Santana Lion having its genesis actually as a Grateful Dead poster. So, and then finally taking us out of the psychedelic period by 1969 is David Singer. And Singer was from Pennsylvania and was always collecting images his whole life as a boy, collecting images. And so he was a collagist, surreal collagist with a deco bent to his fonts. Here, sometimes a sense of humor. You've got tulips with two lips, get it? Somebody said they had that on their wall for 20 years before they figured that out. And so he had, the thing about David Singer is that his lettering was legible. And so Bill Graham loved him, the promoter, because he can actually read the posters. So, and then that really really took us out of the psychedelic period. After 3 months after Woodstock, you had the disaster at Altamont. Rock and roll had become big industry, so to speak. We'll just run through what happened. First of all, the whole scene basically collapsed under its own weight, like all utopian movements. Remember, the Summer of Love, 100,000 kids came out to San Francisco with no job and nowhere to live. That's a lot of people to care for. That's going to wreck your utopian dream right there. The psychedelic style of music had moved on. Now we're moving into Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. The psychedelic style was essentially over, and so the need for posters to be in that psychedelic style was over with. Rock and roll had moved into larger arenas, so you had, Madison Square Garden wasn't going to be sold out with posters. The promoters tended now to not be stoned out hippies like Chet Helms, but they tended to be hardcore business people that were not as likely to want to pay for art to do their promotion. And then finally, you had newspapers and FM radio covering rock and roll. And so what we were left with, this is a 1974 poster, quote unquote. If you get a poster at all, you're looking at something like this. Okay, so finally, just to summarize the movement, culturally, it was a distinct reaction against the conformist, stifling 1950s, and artistically, it was a reaction against modernism and abstract expressionism. It had a discernible known group of artists. It has a recognizable and unique aesthetic that's become emblematic of the period. Reimagined lettering as a fluid, organic art form, and spoke to a new audience, the baby boomers. And finally, it needs to be said that as part of the age of Aquarius, this art had a higher purpose and visually represented not just the dance concerts, but also a utopian ideal that peace and love could change the world.